the other prime example I think is management, especially on the middle layer where they have the pressure from both bottom and up. Because they are the ones who are being hammered because there are customers, there are deadlines, there's the product that has to go out the door, and then they also have all the complaints and frustration of the developers and people who are actually creating that product. And at least I only have experience in trying to help an organization to at least consider an open source transformation. And on that middle layer management level, it's just sometimes the whole thing is just dismissed. Like, yeah, I understand, cool idea. We don't have time for that. We don't have this and that for that. And they are just kind of with ignorance pushing the whole direction into that, running down the road where our product will become unmaintainable at one point. But because of all the short-term goals, it's just something that never becomes a priority. Is it any easier with InnerSource?
No. I mean, like the poor middle managers, they get awful bad rep, and like I feel for them because it is exactly that. I love the way you describe that. As I mean, they're stuck in the middle. Like they're getting these sometimes unrealistic expectations from the top, and they're getting kind of personal opinions from the bottom. I remember we held a kind of a horror story, spooktacular event one Halloween where we were talking about the horror stories related to InnerSource, and one community member were describing this scenario where they had in their organization they had two teams who were sitting next to each other, but they both were parts of different departments, and they both had been allocated resources to build essentially the same thing, right? Like pretty much the same thing. And they were sitting right beside each other, like in the office. So they kind of went to their management and went, we're both being paid to do exactly the same thing. And we're not talking about small groups, right? We're talking about big groups of, like, it wasn't like two individuals. It was big groups that had been budgeted to build the same thing. And separately. And they went through their individual managers and they went, we want to collaborate. Why don't we all work together and we'll either do it in half the time or we'll build it twice as good or whatever it is. But we have, we're going to work together to build the same thing, have better sustainability. And they figured this out beforehand. And they went to their management and the management went, no, because we've already put in the budget justification. If we don't spend this budget, we won't get it next year. So you're just going to have to build the two things simultaneously. That's what you're going to do. And I remember everyone going, oh, the middle management. and at the same time, that's the truth. That's like, if it's not that they both would have, the next time round, someone somewhere will be like, well, if there's two teams doing that, we just get rid of one of them. Because someone with a spreadsheet somewhere will do that. And sometimes that's not acceptable. So, I mean, it's possibly the most efficient choice, but you'd like to think that it would involve those two teams building something better or being redeployed. And maybe that would happen, but that takes too long within the organizational constraints that sometimes exist. So realistically, perhaps the best thing to do is to collaborate as you go and figure out how you can merge it later and make that argument for the next round of budgeting. But perhaps, even though it rationally doesn't make sense, perhaps that was a necessary thing for that organization to, I suppose, evolve. I don't know. I'd like to think so. But it's a cautionary tale about how what's sensible doesn't always, again, no matter how sensible and rational things are, they don't always win. And so it's really about kind of thinking about the context of these sort of things. So yes, still a problem. Wish it was easier. But I do think back to that previous conversation about the kinds of value that people kind of appreciate. There's definitely momentum in management in organizations that are moving towards, like they're starting to have more goals that are moving towards aligning with open source goals and InnerSource goals, like the idea of having something that's more sustainable, like the idea of creating more dynamic workforces that can move from here to there and work remotely and are connected in the ecosystem and are outside in, knowledge and learning quickly from each other through transparency and transparency in general, because that's all good for trust and all of these things that are, and productivity and how you do things faster and even things like developer satisfaction. So all of these concepts, perhaps they weren't in management discussions like, you know, a few years ago. It was kind of like move fast, break things, burn them out early. Like, I mean, that was perfectly fine. You know, it was kind of like there's more where they came from. I mean, I don't think they were saying that, but that was kind of the vibe. Whereas now these days, sustainability, burnout of individuals, how do you maintain, you know, growth mindset? All of these things are aligning more with InnerSource and open source. So one would hope middle management begins to align more with the benefits too.